Hello, my name's Nigel Thorne and I have concerns about the Welsh Government's RSE Code that has been introduced for Welsh schools to develop their own RSE curriculum. The new code requires schools to teach children that everyone has a gender in addition to a sex. This idea is born from queer theory, a philosophical belief promoted by American academic Judith Butler and popularised by her in her book Gender Trouble. Butler believes that language that reflects material reality is oppressive because it reinforces a heterosexual matrix, a belief that to be normal, a boy must be masculine and sexually attracted to girls, and girls must be feminine and sexually attracted to boys. Queer theorists are aiming to undermine heteronormativity, and the tool they're using to do that is language. Proponents of queer theory believe that power lies within language, and by forcing a change in the language we use, we can change people's perceptions. Philosopher Heather Brunskell-Evans talks about Judith Butler.
So Judith Butler, she's very difficult to read. The main influence on Judith Butler is Derrida, who was writing at the same time as Foucault. Foucault is very much tied to the material reality of the body. He actually has a word for this. It's called biopower. It's how power invests the body. Derrida shifts onto language. So this norm and abnormal stuff gets created through language as far as Derrida is concerned. It's also a very interesting theory. But if you stick with Derrida rather than Foucault, you lose the materiality of oppression and you get into this idea that it's just about language games. Now, Judith Butler is coming from that position. It was the fatal mistake that was made in this deconstructive effort, because everything now is about language. We've abandoned the body. The only people that can talk about bodies are trans rights activists. Everybody else can't, particularly women, because apparently it's the language which is doing the damage. And if we just change the language, then this will enable us to be more free. So it's the language which is policing us.
Yes.
It's been brilliant. Talk about 1984. It's been brilliant because trans rights activists have actually changed the language such that it's almost difficult to think your way out of it.
Professor EJ Renold is an academic from Cardiff University. She's been hugely influenced by Judith Butler and has been responsible for developing the Welsh Government RSE Code and educational resources to be used by teachers. She aims to ensure that such amended language is used in the teaching of Welsh children. Professor Renold believes in affirming children's TQ plus identities and claims those who assert TQ plus identities have specific rights.
Over the last 10 years, I've been co-producing research, activism and engagement events and forums with schools, youth groups, third sector agencies, policymakers, to support children and young people to speak out about their often silenced experiences, from sexual harassment in primary schools to LGBTQ plus youth equalities and rights.
The resource she has created for the teaching of secondary school pupils is called Agenda. It has been endorsed by the Welsh Government, has already had a massive influence, and there's a push to get this resource used in Wales, England and internationally.
And one of the moments I've been most proud of was to distill this creative praxis into the Agenda resource and website. So this little film you see behind me captures one of the case studies in the resource of children writing on rulers and ribbons and kites what they want to change to make gender equality and justice matter and fly. And over the last 3 years, we've been sharing this creative praxis in an innovative professional learning programme for teachers in Wales who are preparing for the new statutory relationships and sexuality education curriculum, a curriculum which I continue to have the privilege to inform and shape. And it's a resource and a creative and ethical praxis that's having a significant international reach in the field of RSE, from Finland to Australia. But it started and it has become embedded here in Wales.
It is inconceivable that the Welsh Government is unaware of the international controversy surrounding the influence of queer theory teaching in schools. In 2019, the Congregation for Catholic Education published a document entitled Male and Female, He Created Them, towards a path of dialogue on the question of gender theory in education. The introduction to the document stated, "It is becoming increasingly clear that we are now facing with what might accurately be called an educational crisis, especially in the field of affectivity and sexuality. In many places, curricula are being planned and implemented which allegedly convey a neutral conception of the person and of life, yet in fact reflect an anthropology opposed to faith and to right reason. The disorientation regarding anthropology, which is a widespread feature of our cultural landscape, has undoubtedly helped to destabilize the family as an institution, bringing with it a tendency to cancel out the differences between men and women, presenting them instead as merely the product of historical and cultural conditioning. The context in which the mission of education is carried out is characterized by challenges emerging from varying forms of an ideology that is given the general name gender theory, which denies the difference and reciprocity in nature of a man and a woman and envisages a society without sexual differences, thereby eliminating the anthropological basis of the family. This ideology leads to educational programs and legislative enactments that promote a personal identity and emotional intimacy radically separated from the biological difference between male and female. Consequently, human identity becomes the choice of the individual, one which can also change over time. Despite obvious widespread concern, the Welsh Government is ploughing on regardless, with the intent of disseminating this teaching to our children, with the children who medically transition in response to this social engineering project being collateral damage. At a demonstration in 2019, Charlie Evans talked about the impact that gender identity ideology had on her life.
So last month, I walked with Get the L Out at Manchester Pride. Oh, don't clap yet, you might not like the next sentence. Last year, I tweeted that you did not represent me, and last decade, I didn't identify as a woman. Time has changed me, and for good reason. A decade ago, I was 17 years old. I was tightly binding my chest, and I had shaved my hair, adamant that I was not a girl. I knew I was a boy because I hated the way my chest attracted attention. I hated my period. I hated the way boys looked at me. I knew I was a boy because I loved cars and trucks and mud and boxing and girls. I knew I was a boy because I didn't act like a girl. Nothing about my character felt girly, and trans ideology says everyone feels their gender. I didn't feel like a girl. I knew I was a boy because I meet the diagnostic criteria for gender dysphoria. A strong rejection of typically feminine toys and clothes, mostly male friends, a sense that my feelings and reactions were typical of boys, and the desire to be treated as a boy. When I spoke about these experiences to my older friends or in online chat rooms, the message was affirming. Nobody encouraged the idea that it's okay to be gender non-conforming. Instead, friends and healthcare practitioners alike affirmed my gender. Yes, you are a boy. By now, I had been indoctrinated into the belief that boys and girls must act and feel certain ways, and if they don't, they might be the opposite sex, trapped in the wrong body. I became obsessed with trying to pass. My mental health took an even deeper dive. I hated my wrong body and wanted the world to see my true identity. Except it wasn't true. The teenage black brain plays tricks. I recognise now that trans ideology sold me on the idea I could identify into the powerful group. I was hurt knowing I couldn't marry a woman at that time, hurt that I couldn't have a family that looked like the only families I had seen until then. The idea I could identify out of oppression and be a straight man instead felt liberating. There are few studies behind detransition rates, but I can tell you that there are thousands of us. Our voices are hidden because we're seen by the queer community as an inconvenient consequence of their movement. We are just collateral damage for the greater good. Many, maybe most, are gender non-conforming lesbians who were raised in gendered homes where the roles of girls and boys were strictly defined. No wonder they felt like boys. Most desisted at the same age as me, around age 25. This is not a coincidence. This is the age your brain becomes fully developed. Again, there are no real scientific studies on this, but here's my theory as a biologist. During adolescence, your brain is almost completely remoulded. Your prefrontal cortex, this bit at the front of your head, is the last bit to develop. It's responsible for some really important stuff: controlling impulses, solving problems, making decisions, seeing what impact your choices have on your future. It's the part of us that makes us responsible adults and why teenagers can act so erratic. The maturation of the brain in this way is caused by sex hormones, which are specifically increased during puberty for the purpose of developing the brain's ability to learn, remember, cope with emotions, and process social interactions. As far as we know, these changes are permanent. Is it possible that the reason most women desist in their 20s is because this is when their brain has fully developed? If we know the vital role that sex hormones have in the development of the brain, why do we continue to give preteens hormone blockers to prevent that development? Why are we giving teenagers the choice to have cross-sex hormones almost 10 years before the part of the brain responsible for decision-making and understanding consequence has even developed? There is no evidence that hormone blockers are safe. This generation are guinea pigs, and the fact that scientists and doctors are staying so quiet about it is criminal. It is also concerning that once a teenager has started taking hormone blockers, they're much more likely to transition. As far as I can see, this is because hormone blocking makes desisting incredibly difficult. It almost completely destroys the chances of their brain maturing properly and working out their issues with their body. This should be a huge concern, but the research on the subject and conversations around this in the scientific community are almost entirely absent. Where there should be research, there is silence. We hear time and time again that hormone blockers are safe. Lesbian youth are exceptionally vulnerable to this type of ideology, particularly as many are gender non-conforming. Coupled with the oppression of the female sex more generally, many young lesbians will match the criteria needed for them to start hormone blockers from as young as 10 years old. Is there any surprise in a world that oppresses lesbians and idolizes straight men that so many young girls want to be men? Young lesbians today are up against challenges that were not around when we were their age. Instead of having no lesbian role models, they are surrounded by people who call themselves lesbians. These people are often males who tell them that being a lesbian is transphobic because you are meant to be attracted to gender and not sex. With few groups or communities for lesbian girls who reject this ideology, there are limited places they can go for support. I have no doubt that this further drives young girls onto the path of transitioning. Accepting males into their sexual orientation is a pressure placed on lesbians, but is not expected of straight men. I could not have predicted that 10 years into the future, I wouldn't have the same feelings of self-loathing. I could not have predicted that by allowing my brain to mature, I would grow out of the idea that there is such thing as a boy brain or a girl brain, and I had been born with the wrong one. If I could pass a message 10 years into the past, it would be this: you were not born with the wrong body or the wrong brain. You were born you. There will be days that you hate it. There will be days you stand naked in the mirror, pinching your flesh between your fingertips and asking why, out of all the bodies you could have been born in, why were you born in this one? But there is nothing you can do as a man that you cannot do as a woman. There is no mismatch between your brain and your body. That is just a view held up by sexist ideas of what it is to be a man or a woman. Let your brain mature before making life-changing decisions. Being a woman is not a feeling, it is not an emotion, it is just our biology. It has no bearing on our interests, our hobbies, our clothes, and rejecting traditional ideas of what it's meant to be a woman does not make you a man. I did not go on hormone blockers. If I had, I have no doubt that I wouldn't be standing here today comfortable in my own sex. I don't know if I would have regretted the decision or else lived half a life not knowing what true liberation meant. Liberation is not changing your body to fit society. Liberation is changing society to fit you, and it's time we recognise no child is born in the wrong body.
It is a mandatory part of the curriculum to teach children about gender. where gender is not a synonym for sex, but is used as a term for how someone identifies. It is not a mandatory part of the curriculum to teach about the dangers of queer theory, nor of gender identity ideology, which has undoubtedly been popularised because of it. There is a desperate need for dialogue, but queer theory aims to subvert language with the aim of changing people's perceptions, and you can't have dialogue unless you have agreed terms. In accord with Stonewall's definition, any refusal to accept a child's self-declared gender identity is met with accusations of transphobia. The document from the Congregation for Catholic Education proposes an alternative methodology to blind affirmation, a methodology based on 3 guiding principles: to listen, to reason, and to propose. Irrespective of whether you have positive or negative feelings of the Catholic Church, this is something that we should expect from our educators. Welsh children shouldn't be unwitting participants in a social engineering project. Those who have concerns about the new curriculum may consider supporting Public Child Protection Wales, who are supporting a legal challenge to it. Links are included below.